Jill? Over here!
Brad!
You okay?
What was that thing?
Damned if I know. But right now it's got a hard-on for the only two stars left in town. You and me. I'm not sticking around. Just look around you. The longer we wait, the more screwed we are.
Brad Vickers is one of the most interesting characters that Jill Valentine will encounter during the events of the game Resident Evil 3. One of the last remaining members of Raccoon City's S.T.A.R.S unit, Vickers was one of the only people to visit the Spencer Mansion and live to tell the tale. However, while most of the other survivors left the estate with tales of their heroic actions against Umbrella's evils, Vickers' story was one of cowardice and conscience, having fled in fear shortly after arriving, only to return later in shame and guilt.
Hey! Brad! Where the hell's he going?
The story of Brad Vickers as we know it begins with his recruitment into Raccoon City's S.T.A.R.S unit after its founding in 1996. Growing up in the town of DeLucia, Brad would later move to Raccoon sometime before his recruitment. And while we don't know much about his younger years, we know that he used this time to learn how to fly a helicopter and become proficient with chemical protection. Two skills that would earn him his prestigious position in the RPD's special unit. However, while Brad may have brought many highly sought-after skills to his position, it was his flaws that really stood out to the other members of S.T.A.R.S. Brad was a coward, a fatal detriment that maligned his otherwise impressive talents. And while his fellow Alpha Team members tried their best not to hold it against him, it's likely that underneath the camaraderie of the unit, they feared that Brad would falter in his duties when they needed him the most. A fear that would be realized when reports of brutal killings on the outskirts of the city would call the S.T.A.R.S into action.
The Bravo team was sent in to investigate, but we lost contact.
Look, Chris.
In July of 1998, Brad and the other members of S.T.A.R.S Alpha would be called into the Arklay Mountains after the station would lose contact with S.T.A.R.S Bravo. Finding their abandoned helicopter in the woods, Brad would make landfall nearby. And upon investigation, they would find the body of Bravo's pilot, Kevin Dooley, who had been brutally killed and partially eaten, with further exploration resulting in the death of Alpha's own Joseph Frost. This terrifying and immediate danger prompted Vickers into fleeing the scene, selfishly leaving his companions behind as he escaped to safety. But with this safety also came clarity. Brad knew that he'd left his comrades essentially defenseless against monsters that had already proven themselves capable of killing the highly trained. And so, seemingly out of guilt or embarrassment, he began making attempts to reach his fellow S.T.A.R.S members, hoping that they'd survived the fate that he'd left them to.
This is Brad. S.T.A.R.S Alpha Team. Bravo Team. It doesn't matter. Respond. I repeat, this is
Brad! This is Chris! Brad?
Unfortunately for Brad and his teammates, faulty equipment kept them from establishing a connection. And as he circled a nearby mansion, optimistically hoping for some kind of sign, signal flares would catch his attention just as he was running out of fuel. Brad would rush to the source of the flares, finding a few survivors fighting off some kind of monster on the helipad. Idling in the air, he would drop these teammates a rocket launcher from their cache of firearms, giving them enough firepower to put the beast down for good. Relieved that at least some of his fellow S.T.A.R.S had escaped the fate that he'd left them to, Brad would evacuate the survivors, heading back to Raccoon and learning all about the adventures that had befallen them, and how Umbrella was behind it all. However, despite the ordeal that the unit had just gone through, when they laid their tale at the feet of RPD Police Chief Brian Irons, he disregarded it entirely, going so far as to disband the S.T.A.R.S unit and suspend most of its members. Brad would be spared this fate though, and in accordance with his passive personality, he would keep his head out of most of the fallout, fearing for his job. Vickers believed the stories that his former teammates relayed to him, but without experiencing those events personally, he was able to convince himself that he was still safe inside the city. A pretense that would soon be tested when a T-virus outbreak would strike the city in September of the same year.
Brad! Here they come!
Cases of a cannibalistic disease had begun to plague Raccoon City, and as they began to grow larger and larger in scale, Brad would be forced into the realization that he had fooled himself into believing that what had happened at our Clay was over. Not only had the creatures from the dark of the mansion begun to walk the city's streets, but an even bigger threat had joined them, one whose sole mission was to take out those who had witnessed evidence of Umbrella's Spencer Mansion atrocities. Brad Vickers is one of the most interesting people that Jill will encounter during her adventures in Raccoon. A man who's lived a life dictated by fear and driven by cowardice. A man who knows how much his friends mean to him, but struggles to recognize that importance when everything's on the line and it truly counts. And while there are many things that you can say about a man like Brad, in the end, he accepted his fate with strength and dignity, giving up any possibility of continuing on to ensure the safety of his friend's escape.
Door behind you, go!
Don't think about it. We're gonna make a run for it.
Come on, Jill. We know how this ends.
No, I don't.
Are we still a team?
Always.
Then do me a favor. Don't fuck up like I did. Go!